Ahem! It's easy for us to conceive of a pirate as some sort of mere ruffian or barbaric plunderer, someone that will only be compelled to action by the promise of monetary gain and who, in so doing, exhibits a blatant disregard for anyone who is not themselves, and it would therefore follow that the hyper-pirate civilization as a whole should be most incompetent and lack any and all understanding of the more intricate arts and sciences. A fairly logical and straightforward notion indeed, and no one could blame you for arriving at this conclusion. Many peoples of the archipelago have made that mistake, and in time they all paid dearly. For, though the pirates are exactly that, they are yet much more, though it is true that a pirate may seem, to the ignorant, no more than a simple being, whose only purpose in life is to amass more riches and plunder than they could ever spend. They are yet, in so doing, utterly methodical, and yes, intelligent. The pirates have no concept of philosophy beyond the simple adage of what is yours is ours, and if it isn't, we'll take it. The pirates have no understanding of medicine, save for the fact that they are capable of replacing lost limbs with hooks and wooden pegs crafted with such excellence that even the most advanced prosthetics known to the peoples of the archipelago cannot compare their versatility. The pirates lack any sort of perceivable strategy or tactics, excepting the fact that through centuries of raiding and plundering, and the lives of countless generations spent in the cold embrace of the bottomless sea, not even the most experienced of land-born naval strategists could ever dream to measure up to the prowess of the most inexperienced of pirates. The pirates have no concept of astronomy, and yet they know every star and constellation in the firmament. The pirates exhibit no care in the world for the formal sciences, but in what their restless lifestyle bids them to contend with, they have acquired a greater understanding than anyone else. And so it was, in that early midsummer in the 1374th year of the Great Embarkment, that the late Pirate King had his most entrusted admirals called to the pirate court. It was amongst them that a successor to the throne would be decided, for the pirates believe not in succession by right of birth, and their leaders, since time immemorial, have always been chosen on a basis of martial prowess. And as it is in the nature of all pirates to value one's own gain above all else, the admirals could not come to agreement as to a new pirate king, for a pirate only votes for themselves. It was then that Admiral Blackhook, later known as the Diplomat, a burly broad man with a thick black beard that fell down to his knees and a great iron anchor for a right lower leg, proposed that the king be decided in a contest of piracy. The admiral was infamous. Even amongst pirate kind, there were few who would have durst challenge him, for his anchor was as ponderous as it was deadly, and his sonorous sneeze was feared as far and wide as across the seven seas, albeit owing less to its thunder and more to the admiral's lifelong gunpowder addiction. And his proposal was thus: each of them was to set out and accrue as much wealth as they could within the span of a month, and whoever returned with the greatest plunder would be crowned king. Everyone agreed, and so they set out on a raid to plunder the nearby coasts. No ship was safe from them. Soon enough, no land-borne vessel durst leave the safety of its homeland port, and would take many months to travel across the sea to return to normalcy. But whereas his competitors spent their time mercilessly and thoughtlessly, plundering and ravaging the merchant fleets and coastal towns, Admiral Blackhook had his eye set on a greater treasure. When once the other admirals had departed the court, he promptly made for the HyperFormal waters. The HyperFormal people were accustomed to pirate raids, and over time the attacks on their coastlines had grown so frequent, they ultimately chose to forego all formal procedure and ruthlessly attack and drive back any pirate ship that found its way into their territory. Admiral Blackhook, however, was no ordinary pirate. He knew the sea better than anyone else, and it was thanks to this knowledge that he managed to navigate his way around the HyperFormal patrols all the way to the coast, and further upriver towards the HyperFormal capital. When once the HyperFormal guards posted at the edge of the Great Wall enclosing their capital descried the private fleet, which had so silently slipped past their patrols and even their coast guard, in the distance approaching their city, a great panic erupted at the HyperFormal court. The capital, being so far inland, was ill-defended, and while hasty preparations for a siege were making, the pirate fleet neared and neared. And as the first pirate ships came into clear sight, it became plain that the pirates had no plans of besieging them. Indeed, their fleet was so vast and their ships so numerous that they would be able to take the city by force within short time. And so, in an attempt as desperate as it was delusional, the HyperFormal king ordered his soldiers forsake the comfort of their walls and attack the pirates at once. An attack they did, With surprisingly little resistance, the nearest ships to the defenders were quickly taken out. But what followed was a sight as simple as it was stupefying, for from atop the mast of the flagship of the pirate fleet there threw a broad white flag. The pirates were surrendering. The HyperFormal people were so utterly bewildered at the pirates' request for parley that they could not help but accept it. And what followed shocked them to their very core, for in acceptance of the pirates' request, they were met with an indignant Admiral Blackhook, questioning them why they would aggress so fervently against him, for he had not come to negotiate anything but peace. The HyperFormal king could barely believe what he was hearing. The thought of a pirate having peaceful intentions, going even so far as to propose a truce for 100 years, was utterly foreign to him, so much so that he all but erupted in anger at the absurdity of this proposition. For even if he was to believe the Admiral's words, how could he even possibly have known that the pirates had come in peace? Little did he know that the Admiral's answer would anon spell the end of his reign, and that it would do so even in spite of its absurdity, for it was merely this. The Admiral responded that, less than 2 weeks before, he had a letter of parley sent to the HyperFormal court. The king's heart sunk into his stomach. Indeed, less than 2 days ago, he had received a letter bearing the sigil of a skull and anchor, the Admiral's personal coat of arms, and had, believing it to be nothing more than yet another taunt, torn it apart without even considering to read it. Presently, the king hastened to his chambers, and had turned them upside down until at length a scrap of paper was recovered from behind a series of tall shelves, bearing the familiar sign of the skull and anchor, inscribed upon it a single word: peace. The king had committed the greatest crime conceivable to his people. Not only had he so ignorantly failed to call a peace, which would most certainly have done much to ease the lives of those living at or near the HyperFormal coast, but he had most shamefully aggressed and even sunk in the ships of someone who had come to him with no ill intent. Naturally, the only way in which he could ever hope to make at least some measure of atonement for this most informal act was to promptly order his servants to hand over the entire contents of his treasury to the pirates. Following their departure and completion of their negotiations, the king went into exile, never to be heard from or seen ever again. And thus it was that Admiral Blackhook, thenceforth known as the Diplomat, obtained a treasure greater than any known before to pirate kind or ever since. Upon his return to the pirate court, he was presently crowned pirate king. For over a century, no pirate ships were seen near HyperFormal waters. Indeed, the Admiral, though by no means an honest man, yet kept his promise, if only because of the simple fact that there was nothing left to plunder.